So in the last video we've coded the section background. Now let's look at the text inside. So we want this text to scale, as you can see here, depending on the size of the page, right? So inside of the section there are two paragraph tags, and so let's write the HTML for that first. So open the section tag, go between this starting tag and this ending tag, press enter, and then write P paragraph, and then write the first line. So I wrote hi, I'm Frederick, and then for the second line I wrote paragraph, I'm a designer from Antwerp, read my, and then I'm writing a link, a tag, we write the hashtag, press tab again, and then we can write resume, tab, oh no, tab doesn't work here, dot. Okay, save, and then we see that it appears where we expect it to appear, basically at the very top of our page. Now I want this first line to be bigger than the second line, so I could use a header tag here, but here in this case specifically I prefer to add a class to the paragraph tag. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to choose, sometimes it sort of depends on your personal preference, but here I'm just going to do it this way. Also, it doesn't really matter most of the time which one you pick. Note that the word big doesn't have any meaning for the browser here, so I can save this and you'll see it's exactly the same thing. I could just write as well enormous or even hamburger. As long as we use this same name in CSS, then we're fine. So we're going to go over the CSS here. Oops. No, don't really want it that way. I basically want it this way, right? Okay, so that's our HTML. Now for our CSS. So we're going to scroll down here and we're going to set a default font size. So basically for the default size here, and we're going to do that in the section intro block. And we want the text to respond to the size of the viewport. This is the key of this thing, right? We want it to, so if I set this back to 100%, if we scale this, we want the text to sort of scale as well. And we can use viewport sizes for this. So here's our font, our page again about viewport width and viewport height. So what if we just set the font size to our viewport width? So what if we just say here, font size of our font is, let's say 3VW. So cool, we get our font size, that looks good. And now if we resize the page, we see that it becomes bigger and smaller. Okay, so it looks pretty okay. There's an issue though. So if we scale it down, the font might become really small because our screen is really small. And there are actually two ways to solve this. We can add a media query, like we done before, that uses a default font size for small screens. And then when we switch to bigger font sizes, so when our screen is bigger, we can switch to bigger font sizes. It will work. It might jump around a little bit though, but this is an approach that I would use before. The second approach though is to use a combination of absolute values, so pixels or rems, and viewport sizes. So basically what that does is we set a minimum font size this way by saying it should be at least 14 pixels or at least 1 rem, for example. And then we add some extra viewport width units on top of that. And this is what this post explains, and that's where I got it from. And we basically use this calc thing for that. So calc allows us to type a simple expression where we add two parts, two units basically together. And it's not like we have to use lots of math, it's just a super simple thing where we say, okay, calc, take a minimum of 1 rem and add two viewport widths. And so if we look at this, we can see that it still scales nicely. So you see it scales up and down, but never grows smaller than what we have here as a minimum size. And instead it sort of wraps around. Cool. So this means basically 14 pixels plus 2% to 100ths of the viewport. In our inspector tools, we can actually see if we click on this line and then we go to the styles. And then we are going to look at our computed styles. Where are they? here, font size. So this is the one that's finally chosen. We see that if we resize this font size is going to increase and decrease, right? So you see this value change depending on our font size, but it never grows too small. And it's sort of tweaking to see how much you like. Maybe you can do 0.8 rem plus 2 viewport widths or something. It's up to you. I'm just experimenting here. And then we do another one for the big text. So there we write section intro, but then a dot big, so a class inside of that intro with the class big. So this is inside, so that means this goes around and then there's a big inside. And here we're going to say font size, again calculate 1.5 rems plus 5 viewport widths. And you'll see once I do that, right, so here it scales up and down as well and becomes bigger, but never becomes too small or too big, right? And another thing that we want to do here is also set the font weight. Remember that we picked these different weights in Google Fonts using these numbers 300, 400, 700. So to pick the light version, I want to set the font weight to 300. You can't, the only other option is to use bold, but the other ones are all expressed as these numbers, right? Cool. So finally, to space our text, because it's sort of in this weird position here, we could use Flexbox to center it. So our section then here would use display flex, and then we can set our flex direction to column, and then we would say justify content to center. And that works, but it doesn't look too good because it doesn't have to be in the exact center. Actually, I want it to be somewhere around here. So instead of using this approach, I'll just use padding. So I'll use padding to add some spacing or padding to the top. Now I don't want to use a fixed width, so my padding top will use a view height as well. So it will indicate that we're 20% of the screen from the top, so 20 view height. And again, it's a bit experimenting how much you want from the top. So if we scale this like this, specifically if you scale it like this, you can see it sort of nicely matches this page. So I really like that. And then we do the same for padding left, but here we use an absolute value. And basically this value here corresponds to this value here. So in my portfolio, I also had a padding left of 20 pixels, and I want to use the same one here. So it's nicely aligned on this line. So that's it. We have our intersection. It scales up and down. Our fonts scale up and down. And now it's time for the gallery.